Yo, 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 welcome to Raven and Andrew. Did I get the name right?
Yeah, you got my name right, and I
Dude,
really can't top that
I'm horrible in
introduction.
names. I can't believe I remembered that. Yo,
Clearly,
yo, yo, yo,
clearly.
welcome to Comic Book Talking with Andrew and Raven here on 724 PFM Live.
Well, I guess my show now has to be renamed after that.
Yeah, I forgot. What's the name of your show?
It's Conversations in Pop Culture, everybody. Clearly, you know Raven now. So, how are you, for starters?
I'm doing good. It's hot. It's very freaking hot. Arizona is being horrible. There's a monsoon. I don't know if you guys can see behind me, but there's a monsoon back there, but there's no rain. It's hot wind blowing with no wind at all, with no rain at all. Like not a just I mean, it dropped like 2 degrees and it's like 97 degrees right now. And my AC's out, so I'm sweating. This is not the glisten of a man who's just beautifully glistening in his natural state. This is a man who's hot and humid as shit. Talking to Andrew on Conversations About Comics on Facebook Live.
Well, maybe you need some EBAS, which is what I'm
Oh, nice.
drinking, more or less, and that's code for
They
a
make
lot
they,
of things. Because
they make
EBAS did
glasses.
this thing,
Yeah.
and EBAS is somewhat in this glass, and that's code for
Oh, so
another word.
when you pour liquid into that glass, does it automatically become rum? Because that's an EBAS glass. That'd be a cool glass to own.
That's the idea there. So clearly that's EBAS for you. But we're not talking about EBAS. We're talking about you. And I do want to give a little bit of an introduction to who you are. For those who don't know, you worked on The Gift. You worked on Widow's Web, which I love, and I know Autumn Ivy, and she is fantastic. As well as you've done a lot of work for Zenescope, and you're kind of famous for Wonderland and that entire original trilogy and several of the other Wonderland projects. And so I'm thrilled to have you on because I love Wonderland. We were talking before, and I'm in the middle of Wonderland. And I just love all of this. So before we get into Zenscope and all that stuff, and we were also talking a little bit before, I do want to talk a little bit about how you got into comics. Because your story is interesting to that degree.
Well, the way I broke into comics is so a long time ago there was a street corner, and the only way you could get in comics is when a car would pull up, they'd roll down the window and it'd be like, "Hey," they flash you a $10 bill, and you had to do what you had to do to get into comics. So that was my start. Then I moved up from the street corner and I became a high price. What do they call it? An escort, a comic escort. And in those days, I was a young lad. I was very young, naive, and impressionable. And I got a job at a comic book shop. And I used to tar the roof of this plaza that the comic book shop owner owned. And I'd use that money 8 hours in the blistering sun, tarring a roof that I could have fallen off of multiple times to buy my comics for the week. That was hell. While the owner's son sat in the cool comfort of the comic book store. This is a true fucking story. I'm not even lying about this one. The street corner one, that's not true. This one is true. This is how I got my start in comics. Because somebody gave me a box of comic books. There was some X-Men in there, Man Thing, Iron Fist, and a bunch of not Tales of Horror, House of Mystery. And I just loved that shit. So I went to a comic book store and started collecting. And that led to me working at a comic book store. And that eventually led to me writing comics. And it's just the worst fucking thing that's ever happened to me. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. If you're going to get into something, get into porn. That's where the money is. OnlyFans. That's my OnlyFans, Raven Gregory. That's my new endeavor. I'm switching from comics going into porn. Um, but no, what happened was I was hanging out, smoking weed with my friends and drinking, and somebody said, we should write a comic. And I said, what kind? And the dude was like, I don't know. And I went home and I started writing The Gift that night. That was back in 1999. And I had written the first couple issues, and I started emailing people on the internet, which was this new thing that just came out. And I lucked out. One night I emailed Renee Geerlings over at Top Cow how to get into comics. And she kind of like broke it all down for me. And we started communicating back and forth. And then I met her in Chicago a couple years later and eventually hired her on as my editor. She really liked the story that much, and she was willing to allow me to pay her to be my editor on a book. Which, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to get an editor to edit your comic and you're a new comic book writer or artist, pay an editor. That is the key to... Thank you. That is the key to getting an editor. I didn't know if you guys knew that. We cost a lot of money, though. Just heads up. So from there, The Gift kind of took off. It did well on the indie scene. It eventually got picked up by Image. After they turned it down three times, because it looked too much like an Image book. Thank you, Jim Valentino. I appreciate that. So I was getting ready to cancel The Gift. I was like, dude, I can't afford to do this book anymore. And a little trick I used to do back in the day is I would always overprint the issues when I printed. So I used to look for the biggest shops in the country back then, and I'd send them a huge box of The Gift, and I'd just be like, it's an anthology book. You can just put a copy in all your box holders' books. So I did that. Unbeknownst to me, a store called Mr. Games and Dr. Comics. They got a box, and they did that for their store holders, their box holders, and not years later, but months later, the book started outselling Spawn in the store. And the owners was friends with Eric Larson, who had just become the publisher over at Image, and he's the one who brought The Gift over to Image Comics. And from there, just going on the convention circuit, I ended up meeting Joe and Ralph and a bunch of other fabulous creators, Eric Basadua and Nia Rufino. And I don't know how to say his last name, man. He's given me shit for the last 10 years about his last name. And everyone else says it fine. But I used to say Eric Basadula, and he's like, no. And I was like, Eric Basadua. And he's like, well, this is closer. And then it's like some kind of weird shit where you don't pronounce a letter or something. And I don't man, just be pretty and draw it, man. I have a freaking interesting last name. Ebass. There you go. That's why he switched it to Ebass, because nobody could pronounce his last name. But I digress. So, I ended up meeting Joe and Ralph, and they were fans of The Gift. I was fans of Grim Fairy Tale. And eventually we just kind of hooked up, and it's been magic ever since. And that's why I'm Dave's favorite writer, because I get right to the point of the story. I don't go on tangents at all. That's Dave Franchini, by the way. Or I think it might be Franchini. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Again, another last name.
So before we get to Zenescope here, let's talk a little bit about The Gift. What exactly is The Gift? And then to even talk further about The Gift, because I know you're going to go on a long answer on this one, and I know it. What was that like, really sending out to a bunch of shops and just overprinting the book and really having the fortitude of handling it yourself before it became over on Image's docket? And what was that entire scene like? Because a lot of creators right now really struggle on the indie scene to even get a book and fund it and all that shit.
Yeah, it froze up.
So as I
I missed
was
the.
as I was saying, to
Yeah.
talk about the gift a little bit, what is the gift about, and then to even go further because you're going to want a bit of a tangent, and I know, or a long answer, I should say, a long answer. What was it like to hold out and really wait for Image to pick it up and that rejection and to send it out to a bunch of shops and come up with that strategy to overbook so that at some point it was overselling certain books?
It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. Um, so The Gift was a book where I basically wanted to do a horror superhero story where what would happen if real people got superpowers. And all the people in the stories were flawed and they weren't necessarily hero-esque type characters. And results, because of their choices and the decisions they made, consequences ensued. It was not really a happy ending. It was like the Twilight Zone on crack, which is how I used to sell it back in the day. Um, but it was an experience. The thing about being young or youngish and getting into comics is you make a lot of mistakes, which is how you learn what not to do. But the problem with learning what not to do is you lose that. I don't want to say hunger because the hunger is still there. It just kind of transforms into something else. But you lose that naivety that you need to have a limitless vision on what you want to pursue. Because it's like anything in life. If you want to do something that's outside the norm of what everyone else is doing in, the square box of a 9 to 5 job, people think you're crazy. If you want to be a singer, an artist, a dancer, uh, a poet, anything that has an artistic or creative endeavor, there's not many people that are very encouraging about that. People will say, yeah, they're not like, jump out the airplane with no parachute because, we're just taught from very young to, you know, kind of live this way that society dictates to us. And I got to say, one of the things that was really good about The Gift was I hadn't had the opportunity to experience all those losses and all those mistakes and all the problems. So when I went into it with, bright eyes. I was ready to take on the world. I had a nice chip on my shoulder. I was going to be the best writer ever. And I went out there and I just did it. Whereas now, in my older age, I'm very conscientious about what work I put out there. I when I was first starting writing, I used to write Daredevil comics, Spider-Man comics, Superman comics. Like I have scripts and scripts of all these Marvel and DC stories that I wrote in the hopes of one day working for them. And then I started creating my own books. I started working for Zenescope. I started, putting myself out there and doing things that I wanted to do. And I realized I don't really care about writing for Marvel or DC when I can tell my own stories. I get paid to do it, which is a rarity in this industry because a lot of people don't get paid to do it. They're just breaking even. So that was basically my experience with The Gift. It was a really great learning tool. I enjoyed writing the story. I enjoyed all the ways I got fucked in dealing with that story, whether it was from making the comic to realizing here's a good one. I never knew that you didn't have to have a comic inked. You could get it digitally inked for free by a colorist, and then they could color it. So literally, that was about $15,000 I could have saved if I had known that in the beginning, but I didn't know. So good times, good times.
And to even talk further about this, what was it like to get into Image? Because I know at the time, it was around 2003, Image was kind of starting to come out of the woodwork to being a serious company. And then it took another 8 years for them to actually even get market share in this business. So, what was early 2003, 2004 Image like? What was that like as a, I guess, a standard bar? What was the culture like? Just to give an idea for people, because some people never experienced 2003 Image. I didn't experience 2003 Image.
Well, Image was ever since they put out Spawn and Top Cow and all those books. Image has always been a force to be reckoned with, and you get a lot. You always get a lot more. I'm not sure the word is respect, but you get a lot more. It's not recognition, but people take you more seriously. They don't think your book is a freaking joke when you have the eye on it. And like I was saying earlier, I was ready to call it quits. We barely had enough money to keep going, and when Image finally said yes, it saved the day. So it was really exciting. I've only had I think maybe 3 super geek out moments, like you won the lottery. And one was getting the Image. The second one was getting J. Scott Campbell to do a cover for me. And the third was getting David Finch, who were 2 of my favorite artists of all time that I chased for about 3 years to finally get them to say yes to a cover. And they finally did. And I was like, I was a little Japanese schoolgirl who had just discovered tentacles.
And now to shift a little bit away from the gift and to talk about Zenescope. Because as you mentioned, and I think it's safe to say that the gift kind of cracked open that door for Zenescope. Because Joe and Ralph were both fans of that. And so how did that meeting come up, and what was that like, and what was that conversation all about, and where did it take place? Because back in 2005, 2006, 2007, Zenescope was very heavy on the con scene and was very active on the con scene. And a lot of people discovered Zenescope and got jobs with Zenescope and got hired out by Zenescope because of cons.
Yeah, well, I mean, when we had done conventions together for a couple years, and it's release on Newsarama's website about Zenescope publishing Final Destination, and if you've read The Gift, somebody dies in every single issue in a horrific manner. That's like one of the staples of The Gift.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah. So as soon as I saw the press release, I wrote them because I didn't know anything about the business outside of my own little, square of The Gift. So as soon as I saw the press release, I wrote them. I was like, oh my God, dude, you gotta let me write this because I was born to write this. I wrote The Gift. Everybody dies in a horrible way in every issue. I was born to write Final Destination. And Ralph Tedesco, the vice president of publishing at the time, wrote me back and said, yeah, sorry, it's already written. But we're doing the movie 7, the prequel, to which I wrote back and said, oh my gosh, dude, I love the movie 7. I was born to write this. That's always my answer to everything. I was born to write this. This is my, oh my God, it's breathing. Was born to write this. I breathe too. So I wrote that for them, and over the course of the next few months, 6-7 months, I introduced them to a lot of people. I started helping out a little bit with editorial, and somehow I squirmed my way in there. And the irony is, much like how The Gift got picked up by Image, the way I got my job at Zenescope was I got fired from my day job. I had worked a job for about a year or two. I was a behavioral health tech. I used to take care of group home crazy kids. And if anyone takes offense to me calling group home kids crazy, You didn't work with the kids I work with. We're talking medication, we're talking cutters, some crazy ass shit. Crazy shit. That's why I wrote Wonderland. Anyway, so I got fired from my job. So I took I think my son was 6 or 8 at the time, my oldest son. I took him all of the gift books, and we just started going to every publisher in San Diego. Okay, if you got any work, I'm open, blah, blah. Just carpet bombed the whole freaking convention. And the last stop, I think, was Zenescope, because I had already spoken to them and told them I was interested, and they hired me. They gave me a job as the executive editor. So I started editing books for them. This is right around the time after I had finished writing Return to Wonderland. So it was pretty good. And I also it was around that time, I also met Dave Franchini, the greatest editor in the history of editors. An amazing editor, a wonderful friend, always has an ear, will listen to your whatever's going on in your life, very supportive, gives wonderful notes, amazing notes. This is in no way ass-kissing, but he's just a spectacular editor. I would go so far as to say a genius, and he's a pretty damn good writer.
And to speak about Dave Franchini is going to make me a bunch of money. I just want to make that clear so that definitely Joe and Ralph will never, ever be on this after they hear that. But that's neither here nor there. So clearly you're sort of, I want to table the executive editor component, and we got to talk about Wonderland. So obviously you come into Zenescope, and Zenescope's been around for what, 2-3 years at this point?
Yeah.
And so where did the idea for fucking Wonderland come from? Because we got Zenescope, this brand new company. They've been around for 15 years, everybody. So going back to 2005 and then fast forward to 2007. And where did Wonderland come from? Because it's a very different interpretation of Alice in Wonderland. It's clearly expanding that entire position. I'm a big fan of Alan Moore's Lost Girls, which touches upon elements of that and takes also a very different interpretation. And so where the fuck did this shit come from, man? Because I think that's what everybody wants to know.
I have no idea.
I'm sorry, I have a bad habit. I dive down rabbit holes all the time.
Yeah, I really have no idea. I have been wanting to give that answer, I think, my whole entire life. And it was only today that I realized that today was the day I give that answer. I have no fucking clue. I don't know where any... Hold on. Let me see if I know where any of these ideas come from. I don't know where any fucking... I cursed. God, take a shot. I don't know where any idea came from except Fly. I can get a sense of where the influence for the story came from, but I can't say where the idea came from. It was like, hey, you guys haven't done Wonderland yet. Let's do Wonderland. And then I was like, fuck Alice though. Let's do it about Alice, but let's do it about her daughter. You know what? Let's give her a real screwed up family. Hey, I like dysfunctional families. I know dysfunctional families very well. I want to make the most dysfunctional family in the history of families. But the main component is, regardless of what happens, they struggle to stay together. But it doesn't always work out. And I was like, okay, well, there's the meat of the story. You know, it's Wonderland wrapped in a dysfunctional package. And that really appealed to me.
And there's a lot to talk about. So we got, obviously, Callie, which is an acronym. If you move the letters around, it spells Alice. Intentional, not intentional.
Had no idea about that till Ralph told me. He called me up. We were in a meeting or some shit, and he's like, hey, man, dude, you know what? I really like And when he tells this story, he makes me sound like a freaking surfer dude, which I used to smoke a lot of weed back in the day, so I can see how he could interpret that. Like, he's like, hey man, it was really cool the way Kelly's name turns into Alice, and I'm like, what, dude, for real? Oh my god, I'm a genius. I didn't even realize I did that shit. I was very, very pleased how serendipity worked out there. There's a lot of shit in Wonderland that, I look back on, me, Nei, and Leicester, we look back on some of that shit and we're just like, we were someplace else entirely.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because the thing about Wonderland, that I read the first two of the original trilogy, so there's 3 books, and clearly it almost seems like everything lined up perfectly. It's very weird to read Wonderland knowing certain things about it post Wonderland, and knowing things about writers and artists and letters and Zenescope as a company. And that book shouldn't have happened the way it happened, to be completely honest. And it's brilliant, and it works in such a way. And I know what happens in the 3rd issue, just because I'm a spoiler type of guy. But the original trilogy lines up. So what is that like? Because it's almost perfect. I would say it's almost like 99. If there was a test out of 100, it's 99.9% perfect, if not 100%.
Again, I Wonderland. It's one of the very few books that I've worked on, besides Crows, that was, I don't know how we were creating it. I don't know if we just all met each other at the
really just a perfect book. It really is.
Hello?
Yeah, it's a perfect book.
Okay, you're back. Yeah, I think just me and Leicester and Nei, we all met at the perfect time in our. It just became this thing, and one of the things about that book is I've always felt that, I'm not going to say the book started to go downhill in the ongoing series, but there was a sense that when I was writing it, and me and Joe and Ralph were helping co-create it, when we didn't plan anything, the book worked out. The trilogy, barely any of that was planned. Like, if you read the original outline for Return, nothing like it actually came out. Same with Beyond, which originally I wanted to follow Johnny in Wonderland, which eventually turned into the Looking Glass that we did many years later. But Joe and Ralph were like, it's Kaylee's story, follow Kaylee, which is the best note I ever received. And Beyond is my favorite. I love Beyond more than any other book I've done. But we didn't plan anything. And it was around the 3rd or 4th volume of the ongoing series. And I understand the reasoning behind it, but I felt like something about it just kind of took the air out of the series for me. And not to mention, I had a bunch of tragic shit happen then, and I was off the rails on top of that, and alcoholism, all this crazy other shit. But it just seemed like it coincided with, as soon as we started planning what we were doing with Wonderland, and we stopped just kind of going, it was like, and it just became what it became. Still great. I mean, it still holds up, but.
So to talk about the original trilogy, because I make the argument with the original trilogy, and I'm only 66% through, more than halfway through, but the first 2 volumes, then the 3rd volume, I'm reading the omnibus, so, and I love it so far. I'm going to say that openly. I think it's my favorite Zenescope book that I read, and then Robin Hood is a very close second, might I add. But I guess the way I view it is that it seems very organic, and also it seems that it puts Zenescope on the map in many ways. Because if we look at Zenescope 2005, 2006, they were doing Grim Fairy Tales and they were doing some other stuff, but Wonderland really seemed to be that it factor and that kind of differentiating and saying, oh, they're a bigger company and they're out there and they're doing something very interesting. They have a very different interpretation of Alice and
Yeah.
Callie and Violet, which is Callie's daughter, not to ruin too much there. And even having a different interpretation, we mentioned Johnny and the Mad Hatter and all that stuff. So, what was that like? Because I think that you were kind of the secret sauce at that point, really putting them on the map. And I know that that's a big thing to throw out there, but I don't think it's wrong in any form. If we're looking
Well, I
at it
mean,
honestly,
they gave me an opportunity to tell a story. Uh, you know, with they contributed to the story as much as I did, and they really gave me the freedom as a writer to just kind of go balls to the wall. And when I'd go too far, they'd pull me back. And like most editors, I say 95% of the time, the editor is always right. And they've always been right in one way or another. So I mean, as much as the perception might be that series put them on the map, they're the reason why I'm on the map to begin with. If they hadn't given me a shot, I didn't have a lot of books under my belt at the time when I wrote that, and that series just came out really well. And not only that, I was a writing machine back then. I used to do like 4 or 5 scripts a month, so I was a beast. I was like, oh, let me write. I was like, and they were just like, go ahead, write. I was like, oh shit, let me write another one. Go ahead, write. Hey, what if we do this? Go ahead. So it was a blast, man. Having that kind of company just put that much trust in you to just take the ball and run with it was a pretty great experience.
and then when did it become beyond the original trilogy into an ongoing, and what was that like? Because you were somewhat involved in that and you wrote some of that and then you left, and obviously you kind of touched a little bit upon that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will give Zenescope a massive amount of respect when it comes to Wonderland as a whole, because that book made a lot of money and was really popular. And for years, Ralph, especially Tedesco, was like, the trilogy came out perfect. Let's not touch it. The story is solid. It's done where it is, and we will like Tales from Wonderland. We do Call of Wonderland, Madness of Wonderland, little things, but we never messed with Kaylee in particular. And it wasn't until years later, I can't remember how many years later, but it was quite a few years, that I came up with an idea. I'm not sure if I came up with the idea or Joe or Ralph came up with the idea, but one of us came up with the idea that something about Kaylee, and now Violet's getting older and she's a teenager, and that dynamic of Alice was insane and she was, catatonic and had to deal with the whole thing with Wonderland and her daughter. And then we're like, how would that affect Kaylee, who's now an older woman who has a kid, who's a teenager, which is Violet? How would she interact with her daughter having lived through all that? And there was something really appealing about that. I don't know if you've ever, and I'm positive you have, I don't ever know if you've ever seen Dragon Ball Z. One of my favorite animes as a child and a young man, because it was the only anime or cartoon I had seen at the time where the characters grow old, they have kids, they die, their kids grow old, they have kids, And I was like, this is freaking brilliant. There's real history. There's real continuity. And that was one of the things that inspired me with the ongoing is let's see where this goes. Let's see where it takes them. And finally, Ralph and Joe were like, yeah, man, let's give it another round. And we launched the ongoing, and that went for 50 issues. And, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Came up with some really wild and, crazy shit. Which was, the really wonderful thing about Wonderland that not a lot of people know. Like, people know it, but they don't know it, is one of the most freeing things about writing Wonderland was nothing had to make sense. Because the whole concept of Wonderland is a world where nothing makes sense. It's madness. I was like, wow. So we just kept coming up with crazy ass shit every other issue. We came up with plant girls that were drug dealers. They were drugging everyone. I was like, this is freaking awesome. And they're going to clubs and they're drugging people. This is dope. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of cool. I had a blast writing that series.
So, to give a brief position on Dragon Ball Z, as a slight tangent, Chuck Huber, who plays Hihei in Yu Yu Hakusho and plays Android 17, is completely responsible for my first podcast as well as this show, which led out of my first show. So DBZ is completely responsible in many ways for this interview. I'm just giving everybody a heads up. So people don't know that story, and it's a whole different discussion and point. But to get back to Wonderland, so clearly you just mentioned something very interesting, where Wonderland, nothing has to make sense because it's, a fucked up position and it's sort of encroaching on the human world per se. What was that like? Because it's a very interesting realm. It's a very interesting world. And I think people don't understand that world building is complicated, and I think that you, Ralph, Joe were building that world. And obviously the first trilogy saw it, a bunch of one-shots saw it, and then a 50 ongoing series saw it. And I think that shows testament, and I think that world has weathered very well in the 15 years or maybe the 12 years since Zenescope has been in business.
Well, one of the things that was really cool about the series was as I continued to write it, the world itself continued to evolve. When I originally wrote it, I was heavily influenced by Lovecraft, and I wanted Wonderland to be Cthulhu's dream. But they weren't a big fan of Cthulhu, so we went into a different route where basically Wonderland is where all madness comes from, and the only way to keep Wonderland at bay is to sacrifice innocence to it. And when these people or kids or whatever are sacrificed to Wonderland, they're transformed into these versions, these Wonderland versions of these characters, like the Queen of Hearts, the Mad Hatter, the Cheshire Cat, et cetera, et cetera. So as I was writing the story, the series, the world kept realizing, okay, so Charles Dodson was behind the whole thing, but was he really telling the truth? Was he just using it for his own means? There was a lot of deceptions on what it really was, and we left some of those answers really vague, specifically so the reader could kind of make up their own mind. So it was a real enjoyable experience, just watching it kind of become what it became and seeing what it is now versus what originally it was very, very just shading of what it would eventually be.
And to talk even further about that, and obviously COVID-19, this brings this into it. One of the masks that Zenescope has created is the Cheshire mask, and my EBAS class might be affecting me when I say that, so bear with me, everybody. But clearly, that mask is one of the masks that Zenescope produces, and there's a reason why, due to the popularity of Wonderland. And I think that speaks a lot to it's a testament to some degree in its weathering and being still relevant. So, what is that like for you? Because obviously, you had an input that's a major component of Wonderland. First thing that you think of Wonderland is Callie and the Cheshire Cat and all that
Yeah.
stuff. So, what is that like for you to now see in 2020, in the middle of a crisis per se, that mask is very popular and actually sold out, from my understanding?
No, it's cool. It's cool. I mean, I enjoy. I don't kind of lose my head anymore because once you see an action figure based on your character, I mean, you can't really get any. I saw a statue. I saw the statue. I was like, wow, shit. Then I saw the action figure, and I was like, whoa, shit. And now I see, and then I saw like the movie announcement from Lionsgate, and I was like, whoa, shit. And then after that, I was just like, cool.
Fair
Board
enough.
game.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so now it's like I see anything, and I'm like,
And now let's back. And so obviously Wonderland is massively influential, but as you stated, and I don't want to get too personal unless you want to go down that route. Clearly, stuff was happening in your personal life around, I want to say, 2010 through 2012, and I don't want to get too personal, but out of this position came Karis. And that's a new character to the Zenescope world, and she's the goddess of death. And so, what was that entire experience like of building her out? And I know we're jumping several editorial positions and writing and a variety of other stuff that's out there, but how did that all form? Because I think it's such an interesting character to talk.
I think it was a couple of things. I got divorced in 2011, and the following year, my girlfriend at the time died in a drunk driving accident, and it was 2012. And I started coming up with the vague idea of kind of a Moby Dick story of what would happen if somebody lost someone they loved and that person decided he was going to kill death. So I started like messing with it. I started writing it, and then it was about a year later, my wife passed away. A month and 3 days after my girlfriend died. I mean, a year and 3 days after my girlfriend died. So I kind of tried to use that as a form of catharsis to work through my own personal issues at the time and come to terms with everything. It didn't really work. The only thing that really helps in those kind of situations is time, from what I've now in hindsight come to realize. But it was still a very interesting experience to live through a story so personally. Like almost everything I write, with the exception of I try to find the viewpoint in the character to put myself in that character's shoes, because all these characters in some way or form are me. They're, I'm writing their words, I'm making them dance and do their puppet things. But I felt a real personal connection with the character of that story. Can't even remember the character's name because I haven't seen that book in probably close to a decade now. Nope, not a decade. Oh shit, it's been almost a decade.
Yeah, it's been a decade. It's been a decade, man.
Yeah, it's been pretty close. So yeah, it was an experience as a writer. It's funny because I remember, if you read Return to Wonderland, I remember writing the funeral scene at the end for a character who will not be named in case somebody out there hasn't read Return. And if you haven't read Return, shame on you.
Shame. Just shame.
I remember writing that scene, and I read it again years later, And I sat there and I looked at it, and it was something that Pat Shand is a good friend of mine. He's also a writer who did a lot of work, a lot of body of his work over at Zenescope. And we were talking about something he did, and he wrote it so well, but he had no personal experience in which to draw upon. But whatever he wrote it like he had lived through it. And I remember reading that, and as I read it, the funeral scene, I said to myself, this is really well written, but I had no idea what it was like to be at a funeral and see your loved one in a casket. But yet, when I wrote that, it came out exactly as I would have written it had I experienced that. So, I mean, writing is a very strange animal and creature.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's therapy, sometimes it's just to get a paycheck, but it's a beautiful thing. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
So to talk about that, because I read No Tomorrow, which is Karis's first version, and I read it in hindsight because I also lost my girlfriend. She wound up committing suicide. It's a whole story. She kicked me out of the relationship. There's a lot more components to it, so I completely understand exactly what that feels like.
Right.
There's an exclusive club, not to trivialize this, of people who know what that's like and how it
Yeah.
affects you, how it weighs on you, how it affects you as a writer. I've been avoiding writing about her for a reason because I don't want to relive it. I
Yeah.
personally don't. It's a choice. And I'm a writer in many ways, and I prefer to write about certain things. So I read No Tomorrow very much differently than probably most people have read it. So, what was that like having this story out there and telling this and pitching it and really introducing Karis to the Zenescope universe on a very personal level that very few people in this world can really fully embrace it the way that probably you and me can embrace it?
Well, I mean, one of the most fulfilling things about writing that story was much like Fly. Fly's the only one I get the same response from. People who read Fly who have been through having a loved one addicted to drugs and seeing the horror they go through get the metaphor of Fly. People that read No Tomorrow who've lost someone, they're instantly drawn to the story. They relate to the story, and having people come up to me and tell me that this story affected them and they really felt it is one of the greatest things as a writer you can have a reader come and tell you. Um, the only one, I think probably one of the only things I regret to a small extent is when I did any kind of creator-owned book at Zenescope, I would always put a little excerpt in the back about where the story came from. Like Irresistible was about me getting divorced. So Waking was about the fear of losing your kid, because the world is full of horrors. Or No Tomorrow, the passing of my wife. In hindsight, I kind of wish I had left those out completely, just so people could have taken the story for what it is without knowing what the metaphor was behind it, like what the theme of the story was per se. Because people would have taken it and they would have done what they would instead of like boom, they knew exactly what it was about. Like I get the relatability component of it, but as a writer, I think I was just scared that people wouldn't get it instead of just putting it out there and letting it speak for itself.
Yeah, I agree with that to some degree because clearly knowing all this beforehand and doing research and obviously looking hindsight and reflecting on this, when we talk about things like this, and this is obviously a serious conversation, where I view No Tomorrow differently going into it, knowing what I know.
Right.
And I think that that's a very interesting thing where you know where a writer's coming from and you know what an artist is expected to do. And so I'm just curious because Karis obviously has evolved. Grim Fairy Tales Tale of Terror obviously creates Karis and throws her out there, and then she's been on a lot of covers, and she's clearly evolved as a character, and she's now a prevalent force in the Grim Fairy Tales universe. So, what is that like to see that your baby and this idea evolve into what it is today? Because it hasn't disappeared, it's quite
Um,
prevalent out there.
it's the thing is when you work for a publishing company, unless it's a creator-owned book, nothing's really yours, regardless of how personal it is. I remember way back when uh, me and Pat would talk about how Kaylee's my baby, and Robin Hood was his. And as we continue to work, we eventually not so much put distance between us and the characters, but we came to realize what most freelance writers learn in this business is that regardless of how much you love these characters and no matter how much you're personally invested in them, they're not your characters. They belong to the publisher. The publisher decides what they deem appropriate to do with to that point in your career where you can really distance yourself and look at it as a professional. Then it's kind of, I don't want to say you killed your baby, but it's no longer something that you really take a vested interest in. So like in that sense, I originally envisioned Curse to be a very unique character, a very tragic character, and they wanted her to be more of a crypt keeper character. I don't think either or is right or wrong. It's just a different take on the character. Just like anybody else, like if anybody writes a character after I write it, it's not going to be the exact same character. I wrote Van Helsing for 2 series, and like waiting for Pat Shan to come over, metaphorically speaking, and pat me on the head and say, "Good job." At the same time, I fully understand just from reading his Van Helsing and using that as an influence that my Helsing makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily make it wrong. It's just a different flavor, you know?
Yeah, and let's talk about that because clearly you worked on Van Helsing versus Dracula's daughter, and then you also worked on another version of that. So, what was that like? Because Van Helsing, I love Van Helsing. I got an Elias Chazus commission of Van Helsing that I'm trying to pitch to Zenescope to make into a cover. And I got to send it to Dave because I'm more than happy to surrender that commission to them. So, what was that like knowing the sci fi show is happening and that show is massively popular and really doing that entire series? Because I love Van Helsing. I'm
It was,
biased on this position.
it was cool, man. Van Helsing's a really fun character to write, and I got to tell a unique portion of her story that dealt with a kind of an unknown component of her origin, which which was nice to put a different kind of spin on it. And it was also cool to write a character that I remember reading when she first came out, when Pat was writing her. So I saw her grow as as a character over the years and who she became, and being able to step in those shoes and kind of put my own spin on it. It was very cool. It was very cool. I mean, it's kind of weird that I mean, keep on saying everything in my career is cool, and everything is an experience and everything.
Oh, just be quiet. You know it.
Let's say that it did not suck in any way at all, except for this COVID shit. Because I was writing Van Helsing versus the League of Monsters, and I had to bow out halfway through the series because COVID happened and I couldn't keep up with the deadline. So that's the only disappointing thing at all about the series. I mean, about writing it at all, was that I couldn't pull my weight dealing with all this insanity going on in the world at the same time. So, yeah.
And one of the things that I want to make clear about Zenescope and Van Helsing and all that stuff is that the comics do not follow the same story as the television show. It's kind of a license deal where it's based off of that. I want to make that clear. So if
Oh, yeah.
anybody interested in that sci-fi comic who is watching this, understand that the sci-fi version has a very different outcome than the comics do. And so, to talk about the comic side, because that's what you're involved in, what was that like having to bow out of that? Because I really enjoy your writing. I think you have a dark, twisted sense of writing. I'm a dark person. I have a dark sense of humor. I am definitely somewhat sick and twisted, is how you describe me. Clearly, eBass glass code for something else in there.
Yeah.
Which attributes to me. So, what is that entire situation like for you?
I mean, sometimes, I mean, one of the things about being a writer over the years is when you finally get the opportunity to write, you don't want to turn anything down. Even if you're overworked, even if you aren't all there mentally, even if you're going through personal issues, you never want to turn down a project, because you never want to seem to be that guy who your editor can't turn to and say, hey, I need this book done real quick. Can you break this out for me? And over the years, eventually you kind of get to a place where you have to learn how to say no just to take care of yourself. Because when you don't say no, that's when deadlines get blown. That's when you have to bow out. And Dave has been, no bullshit aside, Dave has been an incredible editor. And every single time I miss a deadline or have something happen in my life that's beyond my control, and then I have to explain to Dave, this is why this script isn't done when they need it, it makes me feel like I'm really letting them. Like I said, Zenescope has a lot of faith in me. They've always been very supportive, and they're a huge part of my career. So I don't want to put them in a position where they have to go through more work because of something on my end.
Yeah, and so what is that like to really kind of be in that position? To say, hey, I'm trying to do what's right for you guys, and I'm trying to do what's right for me, and how has COVID really affected you?
Well, I mean, it's just, like, again, it's just a level of maturity, being able to say, hey, I can't do this. I know I said I could do this, but I can't do this, and I hope you understand. But if I continue to say I'm going to do this, I'm not going to be able to get it done. So you come to terms with things really fast, especially in a situation like COVID-19, where I was sick for nearly a month off of that, and it took weeks after that to recover. So it's just one of those things. You gotta learn very fast to be professional, and then just have the communication with the people you're working with to let them know what's going on.
And to go off of that, because I think it also deals with editing. We mentioned Dave. Dave was on my show 2 days ago. For
Mm-hmm.
those who want to watch that interview, and we spoke a lot about editing and making sure that all is out there. You did a lot of editing for Zenescope, and you've edited books, and so let's talk a little bit about that. So what was that experience like, really taking a shot at editing and making sure books were happening on time and going into that? Because you were kind of one of their first big name exclusive editors,
Yeah,
sort of when
I
Ralph
just
left that position.
like just you reminding me of that makes me want to call Dave right now and say, Dave, I'm sorry for every deadline I've missed, because I remember chasing that cover, or chasing those pencils, or chasing those colors, or chasing, never had to chase letters. But yeah, editing is an extremely stressful job, and the best thing for your mental health as an editor you can do is surround yourself with the most professional, consummate professional people who get things done and follow through with what they say they're going to do. Because it's a really hair pulling job.
And I want to mention a few books you edited so people understand. You did a lot of editing work on Grim Fairy Tales Volume 1. You also did a lot of editing on Robin Hood and that series, especially the earlier stuff. And then Godstorm was in there, which is overly looked. I enjoyed Godstorm. And
Yeah,
then the Jungle Book series, you pretty much edited most of those. So
yeah.
what is that like to really edit a lot of stuff that kind of, I don't want to say put Zenescope on the map, but really kind of added a lot of diversity, in my opinion, to Zenescope. Wonderland clearly, in my opinion, put Zenescope on the map, and then all those other series addressed a lot of different components of Wonderland and added a lot of diversity that attracted new readers into it. And you kind of kept those books on track to some degree.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of that was Joe and Ralph. I mean, they really, after Wonderland, they started personally expanding the line. They were also very open when I would bring them new creators and new ideas. One of two of my favorite series. One was one that Joe conceived, which was Arabian 1001 Arabian Nights, Sinbad, that Dan Wickline wrote, and I loved that story. That was such a well done, character driven and plot driven story that I wish they had been able to finish telling that series, but the sales just didn't hold up. And another that I personally loved, besides everything that Pat Chan did, was the Jungle Book by Mark Miller. He had a really cool idea that he collaborated with Joe and Ralph and myself, and I love what he did with the Jungle Book. It was a very unique take on the series, and again, I wish it had made it to that third trilogy, so he could have kind of closed out the story on them. So hopefully it'll happen one day. But yeah, I mean, again, a lot of it had specifically to do with Joe and Ralph really trusted me to be able to bring something to the table, whether it was something I was personally creating or working on, or whether it was going out and finding the talent. And they were very supportive of that, and the line grew because of it.
And what is that like for you to have gained their trust and really they trust you, and that the three of you in many ways were very closely knit through Wonderland and a lot of these books, and especially the early years, I want to say. And because, trust to me, and just to put this, loyalty and trust are very important to me. I factor my friendships in that way, and I have a lot of stories, And we were speaking about an issue before, and I don't want to get into it, involving Love Hina. That should give everybody a clue of what we were speaking about loyalty to people and friendship. So what was that like for you, that you have these two guys kind of trusting you and believing in you, and saying, hey, we get you, and we understand, and you're all three working together to really build out Zenescope? And I know you keep on saying Joe and Ralph were kind of the brainchild behind it, but I'm calling bullshit on that a little bit, because I also think that in many ways you were the third brain in that group.
Well, I mean, Zenescope is a very family oriented type of business. Working there, they really make you feel like you belong, like you're one of them. And I really, like I said, it was a very enjoyable experience. It still is to this day. Uh, you know, we all grew together. at the same time, which is really cool. I remember one of the cool things is the period of time you would spend on the phone with somebody when you first started out in the business compared to how much time you spend on the phone with people when you're a seasoned professional. Because it goes from hours on the phone talking to Nei, Ebas, Leicester, Joe, Ralph, Dave, to 5-minute conversations, to 1-minute conversations, because you just learn that a lot of those things were just they kind of get worked out of you as you stay longer and longer in the business, because you become very much time oriented. Time is very
Time is money.
valuable and rare.
Time is
You know,
money.
I have whenever somebody asks me to edit a book, I quote them a ridiculous price to edit a book because I don't want to edit a book right now. I have 4 stacks of comics from the last 4 or 5 months that I haven't read that I've been meaning to read. The whole Joe Hill line from Black Label or Hill House Comics. I have all those books, collected every single one. I've read a couple, but I plan to sit down and read all those. I have a literal bookcase full of books that I keep buying off Amazon because I just can't freaking stop myself that I have to read. So, and then I have my kids that I want to spend time with. I got Final Fantasy VII sitting inside my PS4, want to play the shit out of that, but I cannot play it as long as I have a script due, because I would feel like a complete shitbag. And I've been waiting to play this game for however many months since it came out. So it's like, time is so freaking, is such a commodity. Again, one of the things just that's really cool, and I keep saying it's really cool.
Hey, keep saying it because it's awesome what you do.
What it feels like, and it's just, I feel what it feels like is I was incredibly blessed and still am blessed to be able to work with Joe and Ralph. And that's not political. That's not me trying to find the right words or say the right things. I truly do feel blessed, because how many freaking people in their life ever get to sit at home in their boxer shorts, make up stories, have people draw pictures about the stories they write, and then they go and put them on the stands in comic book stores everywhere, and then women start throwing their panties and bras at you and sending you pictures because they think you're sexy and shit. And you're on stage and you're like rapping and you're busting it, and then all of a sudden you're just like, oh shit, this is dope.
Well, Raven, anytime you want me to throw my panties at you, I'll be happy to do it.
That's it.
You might decline. I understand. It's okay.
Shit. But yeah. So that's what I can say about that. Zenescope is a very cool place to be. I would highly recommend it to anyone out there who hasn't had the opportunity. Just don't take my jobs, because I need them shits. I got kids to feed. You take my shit, man. I'm coming for you.
You and Heath Slater. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So now to back out at Zenescope, there's a few things to talk about because you've done independent comics outside of Zenescope, and we were speaking before, and I'm going to bring it up now. You did a comic called Widow's Web, and you did it with Autumn Ivy, and a few other people were involved with it. And I don't know your relationship with her. She's somewhat interesting, for lack of a better word. I love her to death. But what was that like? And just so everybody knows, because I am somewhat biased, when Raven had his store open, I actually bought Widow's Web from Raven himself. And I bought the third naughty but not ultra naughty variant that Mike DeBaffo did. So what was that like, and really building that comic out? Because boy meets girl, girl wants to meet instant, girl wants to eat boy, is the way I describe it.
It was It was something. It was something. I've known Autumn for many years, and she would occasionally post some of her writing on Facebook, and some of her prose work was really exceptional. So I reached out to her about collabing on a book together, and we wanted to do something really passionate. You know, a really passionate love story wrapped in horror. And we came up with the idea of the insect people, basically Widow's Web. They're like they're basically all different kind of insects, but they appear as humans. So we came up with that story. We worked together on that, and then we put it out, and it came out very well. We still have the last 3 issues to put out there. The pencils are all done. The scripts need a little bit of fine tuning, dialogue wise, and I'm hoping to have the covers for issue 4 in the next few months, so I can finally get that book put out and put to bed once and for all. Because it's been waiting for a while. A lot of the delays in that book was I was waiting for a publisher, and I couldn't get a publisher to pick it up because the book had did so well on Kickstarter. No one felt they could monetize the book. So it was a catch-22 where I had a book that was selling really well and making a decent amount of money, but the publishers were like, well, how can we make money off this if you already made money off of it? So I kind of shot myself in the foot.
Yeah,
So
that's an interesting conundrum to be in because I don't know if you know this, but I do a lot of indie creators and I have a lot of indie friends, and I'm going to mention Chuck Pino, who's kind of a story consultant, and the guy's genius. Kicked my ass tonight in poker. I'm just going to say that. So if Chuck's watching, you fucking destroyed me in poker tonight. But what is that like for you? Because this is very much a Kickstarter project and was funded on Kickstarter, but then a publisher doesn't want to pick it up because Kickstarter did so well. Like that seems so broken to me.
yeah, well, I mean, it's disappointing, but in comics, you kind of learn very quickly to roll with the blows. So it's one of those things, you adapt to it. I came to the decision earlier this year that I'm just going to go ahead and put the other books out and not wait for a publisher, which was originally the plan. And when we get it done, we'll get it done. Hopefully sooner, much sooner than later.
And one of the things that I like about this book in particular is that there's a lot of variant covers, at least with the first issue. So Ebass did a cover, Mike DeBaffo, as I mentioned, did a cover, and several other people did a cover. So what was that entire like? Because a lot of those people work for Zenescope. Obviously, being an editor, booking covers. I don't know if you booked covers. Might be making an assumption here. But what was it like to even get all those people to do cool covers for you? And I
Oh,
mean, those
oh,
Ebass covers, that Go Ass cover. I love
yeah,
that Go Ass cover by Ebass.
those are all buddies of mine. I mean, I uh, I was the first one to book Mike DeBalfo on a cover way back in the day. He put a pinup on the wall of a comic book store I used to frequent, and I was like, oh man, I love this. Who is this guy? And I eventually tracked him down, and I had him do spec covers for Zenescope, and he got his first cover over there for the Wonderland Annual. And I've just known Eric. I've known like all these people that I work with. I actually personally know them. Like I fly back before this COVID, and back before everything kind of hit the fan a few years ago. We would fly out to L.A. and hang out with Nei and Eric and everybody for the whole week. And Mike lives in Arizona, so me and him used to hang out all the time. But I mean, when you first start out in this business, you kind of get your click, and that's who you come up with. So you guys are always together in some aspect or form, whether it's at a show or whether it's before a show, or after a show. Everybody crashes over at one person's house. Your friends are flying, like Eric and Nia used to fly in town. They would stay the weekend over at my place, and then we'd all go to the show together. So all these people that were on the covers were all people. And it had spent time with over the years. So, I mean, it was just like one of the coolest things about Widow's Web was it was all friends. Everybody who's involved in that book in some way or form is a friend of mine that I've known for years.
And just for complete transparency, I just released Sun Kumanaki tonight, and I interviewed her, and I actually got to interview Ebass, and he's going to be released tomorrow or Sunday. I haven't decided which yet, and Ebass is one of the nicest guys ever. Really cool guy. He talks about mentoring and bringing up people, and so he is fantastic, and I want to make that clear. So for all people listening, watching this, definitely look out for that Ebass interview. Really cool guy. I love that Go Ass cover, and I agree where it's awesome that all these people got to do covers on very much an indie book, because we don't see that all that often in the indie realm. I have a friend who's looking for a bunch of cover artists, and it's one of the hardest things he's trying to figure out how to do. And so that's something that I really appreciate about Widow's Web. As I stated, I bought that Mike DeBaffo book because I thought it was wonderful. I actually have that Ebass book too because I love Ebass. And I paid a decent amount of money, and it's worth a lot more money now than it was. And that's the other thing about Widow's Web, is that Widow's Web, to me, and I don't know how you feel about this, has appreciated in value. And I've interviewed Autumn Ivy as well, just for complete transparency. So how do you feel that your variants have increased in value? Because that's kind of a cool thing to view from the collector's position, which I'm also in.
Yeah, I mean, I cheat. That's all there is to it. I cheat. I work with some exceptionally talented people that make my ideas look way better than they possibly would look without them. Whether it's DeBalfo or Eric or Nei or Elias, I'm lucky enough that I work with the very best of the best, and they turn out exceptional work every single time.
And obviously, I forgot to mention Chazus. We talked about Chazus, where I'm trying to pitch in.
Garza's the shit.
He's great too. He's great too. He's fantastic. His Glinda is the shit. He can draw Glinda. New school, man. That shit is amazing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he would have given me hell if I forgot that. Sean Chan. So, let's see. Am I forgetting anyone?
Just go through the list. Go through the list. It's a shout out time. Oh, who can we mention?
Anthony Spey. Freaking God. Who else?
Spey. Cardi. Let's go with Cardi. Let's go with what is it? Vincent. I can't even say his name. I'm shot for words here.
My colorist. I don't know how to say her last name.
Ula Moss?
Oh, shit. Troy Patier, the guy who letters it. All those guys. Autumn, of course. All those guys. Everybody involved in that book was dope. Everybody did a great job.
Well, I'm going to throw this out because we're going to put Autumn into a corner here, but she has to promote this for sure. That's live, and she has no choice but to promote this. So I'm just throwing it out there. So.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. We can be Canada right now.
The screen was freezing up. As we're doing the interview, occasionally it'll freeze up, and I'll miss like 4 seconds of the conversation, and I'll have to try to figure out exactly what's going on. And I get the barest end of the sentence, and then I'm like, oh, shit, okay, I know how to answer this.
And you've been doing a great job with it, might I add.
It just did it again. It did it. As soon as you were like, and you've been doing a great, I actually got to get ready to run. You're just like, yeah, you've been doing a great, and it froze. And I was like, oh shit, that's funny. I'm telling you.
So clearly I've been occupying a lot of your time. I wanted to touch upon Nei and Crows because I think that's fantastic. So what is that entire situation like? To write
Crows
Crows
is
with her.
dope. Buy it. It's by Nei. It's amazing. It's the best thing ever. Buy it. I can't even. The thing is, I've talked to Nei about this a lot. We can't even describe Crows to people. People read that book and they're just like blown away. I wrote that book and she drew that book, and neither of us remember any of it. We hit a place that I've never hit before, where we were just creating, and what came out was so visceral and pure. We don't know where it came from, especially the first two volumes. It's writing unlike anything I've ever done. It's very poetic. It's very flowery and narration based. It's a beautiful story. I'm gonna try to do this. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna fuck this up. It's a story about a crow that becomes a woman at moonlight. I mean, as the moon rises, she becomes a woman. And then she gets to experience the world through those senses. But as the morning comes, she's transformed back into a crow. And that's her experience. She forgets everything and she has to start all over again.
I'm gonna take a stab at this to summarize it. It's the Canterbury Tales meets Cinderella
I have no idea what the Canterbury Tales are.
with amnesia. Anybody who's a literature expert will get this, and it'll make sense. I promise. It's the perfect explanation of this entire position. It's perfect. Right. Trust me on this one. So going beyond Crows, obviously, where can people buy that? Because I want people to buy your work.
I think Nei is going to be doing a Kickstarter for that again. I don't think I'm not sure if there might be some more issue ones out there. I mean, I would say eBay is a good place to find it. If you check out Nei Ruffino, NeiRuffino on Facebook, I'm sure she has some for sale on her web store. I can't be 100% sure because it's been out for a while. We've written that.
Is it digital? Did you know if it's digital?
I have no idea. She would know. But we did that book over the last, I want to say almost 10 years now. Nope, wait. At least half a decade. Probably 6 years. We do one every 1 to 2. We do one every 2 to 3 years. So we have one last one that we're doing. We're doing a prologue to the series, a prelude that tells the origin of her, and we will be putting that out sometime next year. And I'm pretty sure she'll be doing a Kickstarter releasing the whole series. So it's gonna be cool. 2021, no COVID.
We can only hope. We can only hope. Now, going beyond that, because obviously I want to let you go at some point, but I also want to give you an opportunity to promote yourself. So there's a lot of shit you've done, you've accomplished, probably more than half the comic people I interview and half the big guys that I know and interact with. And I think you've done the spectrum and then some. So where can people find you, follow you, support you, check out what you do? You know, you got an OnlyFans, or I don't know if that was joking, because, I mean, we could start a porn company if you want. I'm more than happy to start a porn company with you, or a wrestling company if you're down. One or the other.
You can find me on Facebook, Raven Gregory, the Raven Gregory. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I used to have a web store, but now the web store is not working. So, I mean, Amazon, and you type in my name, all the books I've ever read come up. They're all wonderful reads. At least I think so. I hope if you get a chance to read it, you also enjoy them. Um, yeah, and that's basically it.
And
Uh,
also, just to add to this, you have a Zenescope thing that you wrote. I just actually ordered off of Midtown in the previews, so I'm pretty sure we could talk about that because that's pretty common knowledge. You have a read coming out also that you've written.
oh yeah, I have a not a graphic novel, but an oversized Grim Fairy Tales presents Ares that focuses on the god of war that spins out of the events of the 2020 Grim Universe special. So you get to see what happened to Ares. It's a big nonstop action book. Lots of blood. I don't know if you guys are into that. Lots of
Everybody's into it.
it's the god of war, so war happens. It's gonna be a lot of fun. That is actually
Sorry, you cut out. It was actually what? Technical difficulties. We are experiencing technical difficulties. My awkward turtle is getting tired. Forward, backwards, forward, forward, backwards. Getting Raven back. We cannot find Raven. This is a problem. Let us see if we can contact Raven. In dire circumstances, everybody, clearly. We're going to wait a few minutes to see if Raven is going to get back up. This happens all the time, clearly. Clearly, danger, danger. I feel so awkward right now, everybody who's live watching this, checking it out. Not sure how to push this out there. Widow's Web, great comic. Love Autumn Ivy. If she's watching, hopefully. I'm actually going to probably shoot her a message because I know her on Facebook. For those who don't, great person to check out. Awesome cosplayer. She's gotten super fit, by the way. In the last year, that girl's gotten massively fit. Man, she inspires me to get all fit up and get jacked out. I just want to get fit again. It's great. She's fantastic. So I recommend you checking out her. I interviewed her a while back, trying to figure out what Raven is. It's clearly a problem. Not too sure what's happening, but hey, sometimes in life things get complicated. I'm so confused, absolutely confused. Just cut out in the middle of actually. Don't know if he lost connection. Don't know what happened. I'm so utterly confused at the moment, trying to see where he is. I'm going to try to recall him again. We are in the process of reconnecting. You sure he's in the middle of a monsoon? Oh boy, this is kind of crazy. So we're gonna wait like a minute more, and then obviously just to push this out there. Oh boy, this is so weird. I got a feeling he probably lost some power or something. But we're gonna try him again one more time because obviously I really want to finish this interview, and we were speaking before actually just to talk a little bit about this. One of the things is that this interview has been definitely cursed. From the 4 or 5 times we tried to schedule it, something's happened in this interview. So clearly, I'm going to try to call him again and see what happens. Otherwise, I'll just finish it out and talk about this. So, yeah, I'm going to give him like another minute or so. Obviously, a lot's going on, So clearly, we've been speaking for a while. Obviously, you get a sense of who he is, what he's done, everything in between, and all that fun stuff. And obviously, he's a very instrumental component of Zenescope and their build out and what they've accomplished. And so I'm going to give him about another minute or so, and we're going to call him again and see where he's at. Otherwise, I'll just promote what he's done, and I'll find out where all he's been and all his links and all that fun stuff with this. So yeah, but obviously, just to speak about Autumn Ivy, just to give her a plug here, and I'm sure she'll watch this and she'll push this out. Hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers for that one. She's a cosplayer, for those who don't know. She's done a lot of amazing cosplays. And she's the co-writer on Widow's Web. And I love Widow's Web. And as Raven was explaining, it's kind of one of those things where or at least I explained it, she explained it to me. Boy meets girl, girl wants to eat boy. And these insect people want to eat humans, and they pose as humans, and well, it's that horror wrapped up in a love story component, and then obviously Nei with crows and all that fun stuff. So very, very cool stuff that's going on with Raven, and let's try him again to call him and see where he's at, and hopefully this will work. Crossing our fingers. So obviously, I kind of want to finish this up. I think it's evident that we're not going to be at this point where I don't think we can reconnect. So obviously, if you type in anything Raven Gregory, it'll come up. The Raven Gregory on Facebook. You type in Raven Gregory on Instagram. I think he has an Instagram, Twitter, Raven Gregory. Obviously, Widow's Web. He mentioned issue 4 will be coming out there. He's doing a lot of stuff with Zenescope. Obviously, the trilogy with Wonderland. I think the Omnibus is back in stock for those who want to check that out. And that features the original trilogy and a lot of one-shots and a lot of other components in there. So definitely check that out because he wrote a majority of that, especially the trilogy. As I stated and we were talking about, it's very much a perfect trilogy. It's very rare in comics that works. So check that out. Crow, as he said, Nei might be running another Kickstarter with that towards the back end of this year or early next year. 2021, he said it, not me, no COVID, getting back to that. Obviously, he wrote kind of, I would say 40% of Van Helsing versus League of Monsters. So if you're interested in his writing, he's got a lot of stuff with Karis out there. No Tomorrow, fantastic graphic novel, as we were talking. Personal during this interview is the idea that deals with stuff and death, and girlfriend and his wife sort of died within about a year and a half of each other, 2 years. So very different meaning, might ruin part of that for you, but that's out there and that could easily be picked up, I think, still physically as well as digitally in a variety of methods. So check that out if you're interested in that story and viewing that. And anything you type in with the guy is going to come up. I guarantee you, if you go on Google, Raven Gregory, you're going to find some stuff. A lot of cool stuff's coming out. And that's all I can say about it. I've been saying it every interview that I've done with this, where clearly, you should support him in what he's doing and everything he's pushing out, whether that's Indie or Zenescope. It means something. If you got extra money in your bank account, you're doing great. Definitely buy a trade, buy a book of his. Definitely when Nei's thing comes out, support her and what she's doing with the Crow, or Crow, as it's called. I'm not sure if it's the Crow or Crow, but definitely support her and his work because it means something. And if you don't have that money, and I've been saying it jokingly, but I seriously mean this, where if you don't have money, but you have electricity and internet, follow people on social media. Check out their Facebook page. Like their stuff. Share their work. Throw it out there. See what happens, because a share is massively important today. Social media has never been more important during COVID. And so that's something that I just want to throw out there and push out there and really make it clear that unless you don't have electricity or internet, and if you don't, I've been joking about it, but I'm serious about it. If you can figure out a way how to not watch this with electricity and internet, please shoot me a DM on Instagram, Twitter, shoot me a direct message on Facebook, because I would love to know how you're doing this. Smoke signals, you get in your brain mentally, because I would love to patent that technology, and we can split that patent 50-50. I'll fund that complete thing, and I'm joking a little bit with that, but if you do not have electricity or internet or whatever your problem is, I would love to help you if you're in a situation like that in any capacity, knowledge, economically, figuring out somebody to talk to. Reach out to me, but anything shy of that is just an excuse not to support some of the most talented people right now in the comic industry. So if you got electricity and internet access, definitely throw a social media follow. Check out what they're doing. Tweet at them, engage them, give them a heart on Twitter, give them a like on Facebook, a laugh symbol, anything, because that's always a good thing to do. And so I can't preach that enough during all this interview stuff and throwing it out there. And definitely support Raven, because the guy is so good. And if you're like me who loves sick and twisted shit, I love this stuff. So definitely support that. And if that's what you're looking for, check out what he's doing. Just type it in on Zenescope.com, Raven Gregory. I am more than positive a bunch of stuff's coming out. And obviously, as he stated, some stuff's coming out in the next month or two that he's done dealing with Ares. So be on the lookout for that stuff. I actually just ordered it off of MidtownComics.com because that's where I get my comics from. But I'm sure your comic entity has that as well. And so that's 2-3 months out. And that bunch of cool covers with that one. Really cool covers done by a bunch of cool people. So definitely check that out. And I appreciate everybody listening to this. As always, obviously we had some technical difficulties with this, but I think that everybody can truly appreciate what Raven has done. And we spoke for a bunch of stuff and gone through a variety of different stuff. And remember, eBass Cup is fantastic. And I'm going to say this, eBass, as I stated before, is coming out either tomorrow or Sunday. Check that out. Sun Kumanaki, for those who are big Zenescope fans, has been released actually before this interview. And I can't thank Raven enough, even though he's not here to hear this. I'll shoot him a direct message of this stuff being out there for being on, because we have been trying to do this interview for 3.5 years. And every time that we've done it in the last probably 2 months, it's been cursed to some degree. And I think the curse has continued, but we got through probably 95% of this hands-free, uncursed, or a little difficulty, but still doing it amazingly. And I cannot appreciate him enough for donating his time and being on my show and us having a great time talking about stuff, and him being so candid about this. And hopefully Ralph Joe won't shoot me or him when they hear this, and hopefully maybe one or both of them will be on my show at some point. Anyway, everybody, I appreciate everybody listening. Hour 40 minutes, it's a lot of time to hear me out and talk to me and engage with me, but absolutely appreciate everybody who listens. Appreciate Raven for donating his time, and obviously I'm going to shoot him a direct message in a few minutes, and I'm just going to send him this, and totally appreciate it. And I hope everybody stays safe till my next interview. I think Tuesday is my next one. I'm not going to tell you who it is. You're going to have to tune in for that one. And until then, everybody, have a wonderful weekend, and I'll catch you on Tuesday.